Hello, everyone. My name is Mike from PA, and we are here to talk about Beau of the Fifth Column. Beau is a famous lefty YouTuber with over 600,000 subscribers, known for his big unkept beard and his southern drawl. Beau has been growing in YouTube and becoming a larger and larger influence on how the left is perceived, both on this platform and in much of the discussions of leftism on the internet as a whole. Recently, I was disturbed to find out that he had a checkered history and his past behavior in exploiting workers, vulnerable people, including female immigrants, young women, 19 years old, brought here to work for less than minimum wage, and he personally profited. Beau has not shown any contrition whatsoever for these actions. And before we get started, this video is not intended to cancel someone, to be a purity test, or do anything to damage the leftist community as a whole. I'm making this video because I believe it's important that we on the left hold each other accountable, especially when one of our own refuses that accountability. For those of you crying that Beau has come redeemed, he's doing a lot of good for the left, the first thing we must wrestle with is that for redemption and forgiveness to happen, one must show contrition. One must show remorse. One must show transparency and honesty. Beau has done none of those things. He continues to misrepresent what he did and why and who he was. And that is not acceptable for us on the left. What worries me most is that his voice is being advanced over others, while he has personally profited from the exploitation of recent immigrants in some of the most vile ways you can exploit someone. And we are going to go over in detail, using both primary documents, the testimony of the women exploited themselves, and the interpretations of both law and policy from a number of sources. I don't relish this, and I don't want to destroy anyone. But what I do want is that our cause to be advanced, the cause of the immigrant and the impoverished and the exploited to be alleviated. I want to see progress in this country and this society. And that will not happen unless we start showing accountability and honesty for the exploitation and harm of the past. Now, before we begin, I want you to know what we're talking about exactly. And I'm going to go to Beau himself to show you what he says and who he is.
Now, one of the questions that pops up, not one of the most frequently asked questions, but one of the questions that pops up kind of often, am I a convicted human trafficker? No, of course not. That's stupid. Convicted alien smuggler. There is a difference.
So Beau is absolutely right that there is a difference. And we're going to explain why he has been called a human trafficker, not by me, but by many legitimate sources and organizations that try to combat human trafficking. Beau is right. He's technically right. He was only convicted of alien smuggling and fraud and deception of those that he smuggled. But if you look at the facts of the case, you will find that he wasn't some coyote fighting to help people escape oppression as refugees. He was the most vile type of human trafficker. Somebody who brings people here under false pretenses and works them for sub-minimum wage, houses them in crowded conditions, and then exploits them for his own personal profit. I draw your attention to the United Nations definition on human trafficking. Human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. Men, women, and children of all ages and from all backgrounds can become victims of this crime, which occurs in every region of the world. The traffickers often use violence or fraudulent employment agencies and fake promises of education and job opportunities to trick and coerce these victims. I draw your attention to the fraudulent employment agencies because that was what Beau did, and he made millions of dollars doing it. This is who Beau is. Justin Eric King. He was sentenced 41 months in prison, followed by 3 years suspended release, resulting from his conviction on charges of conspiracy to commit visa fraud, and conspiracy to commit alien smuggling. The defendant and his co-conspirators brought illegal aliens, mostly from Bulgaria and Romania, to work in the hotel industry in and around Dustin, Florida. And that is where the trafficking comes in, the labor exploitation. Here, and in case you're wondering, here is a report from the Southern Poverty Law Center that cites his case called Culture Shock, the exploitation of J-1 cultural exchange workers. One of the things that Beau did is he exploited the J-1 visa. Well, what is the J-1 visa? They come to experience all America has to offer. They hope to pay their way by working a summer job as they experience a new culture and learn English. They work in our hotels, restaurants, fast food chains, and amusement parks. They're J-1 guest workers. The J-1 Visa Summer Work Travel Program. Congress created this program 50 years ago to increase mutual understanding between the people of the United States and people of other countries by means of educational and cultural exchange. Foreign youths pay American job placement agencies designated by the Department of State called sponsors to be placed with U.S. employers in jobs that offer cultural exchange opportunities and for trainees and interns professional job training. Now, employers are using the program to fill labor needs, transforming a program designed to foster international goodwill into a source of cheap, exploitable labor. For the employers, the program offers a way to cut labor costs. Employers do not have to pay payroll taxes for J-1 workers. The savings an employer can realize by not paying an employee's Medicare, Social Security, or federal unemployment tax, around 8% on its total payroll expenses, have led staffing agencies to promote the program as an inexpensive labor force. The sponsors and their overseas partners, the groups that recruit and screen participants, are reaping a windfall by charging J-1 workers hundreds or even thousands of dollars in fees to participate in the program. These fees are completely unregulated, and students and their families often fall into debt to pay them and other travel expenses. This recruitment debt leaves students vulnerable to exploitation. Faced with pressure to pay off loans, students and interns may opt to endure workplace abuse until they can return home. This is exactly what happened with Beau. He took in hundreds of women from Romania and Bulgaria and other places around the world and charged them thousands of dollars in fees in order to exploit them. And here it is. When these workers aren't on the job, they are often forced to live in overcrowded housing with other J-1 workers. They are frequently paid less than the minimum wage after their employer makes excessive deductions for housing, uniform, transportation, and other expenses. Some J-1 workers discover they must work a second job just to survive. But this is more than a story of debt and disappointment. It has some young students at risk of human trafficking and other nefarious activity. And you notice this footnote. That is USA versus Berman et al. This is the case that convicted Beau of alien smuggling. It was J-1 SWT students used in labor trafficking scheme in the Florida Panhandle. Let's discuss these charges even more in depth. Now you know what they were doing. They were exploiting young students and young women from Romania, Bulgaria, and Eastern Europe to come here and work. What exactly was the process? What were they doing? How was Beau profiting? How was Beau exploiting them? Why was he charged with alien smuggling? What was the crime that he committed? This is the next document we're going to review is the Florida Strategic Plan on Human Trafficking from Florida State University, and this was paid for by the Florida Bar Association, the goal of which was to improve Florida law and examine the major human trafficking cases that took place. So this is the Destin King labor trafficking case. King, that is Justin King, or Beau. Labor trafficking is not confined to Florida's agricultural sector, but is increasingly found in Florida's hospitality and tourism industries as well. Labor trafficking. These are not my words. This is not my interpretation. This is the view of the Center for Child Welfare and the Florida Bar Association. This is the view of his activities. The Florida Panhandle was the location of a criminal investigation that culminated in the 2008 conviction of both U.S. citizen Justin King and a number of Russian nationals for smuggling aliens to work in Florida resorts. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office had for several years been scrutinizing patterns of labor trafficking in the area of Destin and Fort Walton Beach. Beginning in as early as 1999, Russian nationals Anna, Alexander, and Stan began supplying young Eastern European men and women to panhandle resorts for janitorial and maid services. Operating under the name of Eurohouse Holding Corporation, they brought the Eastern European workers to the Florida Panhandle for short-term work on temporary J-1 or H-2B visas. Now, those J-1 visas we talked about already. Those were the cultural exchange visas. He also fraudulently created H-2B visas, which are temporary work visas. The vast majority of the workers were females between the ages of 19 and 23. Moreover, most were also students who were intent upon returning after several months to their homes in Eastern Europe to continue their studies. So the reason why I'm bringing this up and why we are going in such depth is one of the lies that Beau tells was that he was working as a private military contractor to rescue Jews from Uzbekistan and other, quote, exploited and dangerous, exploited people. That he was the good guy. He was fighting against the man. He didn't believe in open borders. When in reality, what he was convicted of was defrauding and exploiting vulnerable young women from Eastern Europe. And we're going to get into those details. This is disgusting behavior. And he continues to lie and dissemble about this past. Many had been promised non-existent jobs when they were recruited in their home countries. Upon their arrival in the Florida Panhandle, they were instead employed for substandard wages by Eurohouse and assigned to work in local hotels and resorts. Eurohouse operated as a labor subcontractor, providing services to hotels such as the Sandestin Hilton. Eurohouse was able to offer the low bid on labor contracts precisely because they did not pay federal minimum wages to their employees. Beau brought women here with his co-conspirators and did not pay the federal minimum wage, which at the time was $7.25 an hour. They further charged the students between $1,500 and $2,500 each for visa processing, job placement, and transportation fees. Now do the math. If you're making $7.25 an hour and someone charges you $2,500, that is an incredible amount of money. And when you look at the scale of what Beau did, it was hundreds of people. And it led to over $3.2 million in profit from these exploited workers. In addition, the young workers were charged to stay 15 to 20 persons per condominium through a variety of locations throughout the Panhandle. So imagine this, coming to America under false promises, finding that the job you had been indicated you were going to work at didn't exist, and that you were charged $250 a month to move into a condominium with 20 other people. That was what he was doing. He was charging them $250 in rent per person and jamming them into an apartment with 20 other people. This is despicable. Enforcement was carried out by verbal abuse, threats of violence, and threats of fines or non-payment of wages. So when the women came here, remember, majority of them, 19 to 23, they were kept in line by threats of violence and threats of fines and non-payment of wages. What would you call this? Almost all the young workers had a plane ticket allowing them to return to their home countries at the end of the summer tourism season. But they would have incurred substantial costs were they to try to fly home at an earlier date. The labor trafficking conspiracy overall proved lucrative and seemingly insulated from law enforcement oversight. Because the victims were exploited on a temporary basis, they most often simply chose to return home at the end of the summer without reporting the exploitation or participating in the investigation. That was the scam. These women were not brought here as refugees. They were not brought here as long-term migrants. They were brought here under false pretenses with false promises, exploited, and then sent home. And the only person who was profiting was Beau and his co-conspirators. The pattern finally changed in 2003 with the exploitation of a group of foreign nationals, predominantly from Bulgaria and Romania. With their assistance, the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office discovered a further criminal conspiracy that involved even more extensive visa fraud and alien smuggling on the part of Eurohouse officials. Now remember, it's not just the alien smuggling. He didn't just have people pay him to set up fraudulent visas. They brought them here and then they forced them to work for less than minimum wage. The ensuing investigation also revealed that U.S. citizen Justin King, Beau, was employed as the frontman for Eurohouse, negotiating new contracts with hotel owners and communicating with state and federal agencies to further their conspiracy. As part of his role in the criminal operation, King submitted over 1,000 fraudulent visa applications. King and his co-conspirators were found to have brought in over 200 foreign nationals to work as hotel housekeepers through the use of these illegally obtained visas. Evidence presented at trial showed that King and his co-conspirators had used forged hotel letterheads to further their scam. Most of the foreign national workers brought in through the fraudulent visa scheme were eventually contracted out to hotels and resorts other than those who had been supposedly sponsored them for their visa. Finally, it was revealed that when the federal government had become suspicious and stopped issuing visas to Eurohouse, King and the other defendants continued their fraudulent activity under the guise of a new labor contracting company called Woland. King was convicted on 7 counts of visa fraud and alien smuggling and sentenced to 41 months in prison. His co-conspirators received 18, 23, and 12 months in prison. They were also found liable for a joint forfeiture of over $1 million. So this is why it is human trafficking. He didn't just bring these people over for a fee. These were not people that were brought here to survive after difficult circumstances. These were not refugees. These were exploited workers who were brought here under false pretenses, paid below the minimum wage, and he pocketed over $1 million. What the hell? Curiously, human trafficking charges were not part of the prosecution. And this is the point that Beau loves to say. That is why, at the beginning of this video, Beau pointed out that he had been convicted of alien smuggling, not human trafficking. Quote, there is a difference. It's true. He wasn't charged with human trafficking. He was charged with alien smuggling and found guilty. But the facts are clear. He engaged in human trafficking. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida would later note that the criminal behavior had in fact included all of the elements that would establish forced labor under Title 18, Section 1589. In particular, the use of labor attained through false promises, through threats of serious harm, or through abuse of law or legal process, i.e. threats of deportation. This is not my view. This is the view of the U.S. Attorney. Why didn't they prosecute? I do not know. Federal prosecutors have complete discretion. And maybe they felt that it would be better and easier to secure a conviction of Justin if they didn't bring in the trafficking charges. For many people, trafficking is they imagine a kidnapped person, a person threatened with a gun, person forced into sex work. But that is not the only thing that human trafficking can mean. As we explained on the United Nations definition of human trafficking, it involves exploitative use of deception, threats for profit. And that includes economic exploitation, like we saw here. The King labor trafficking case is a very clear indicator of the degree to which forced labor and abusive labor practices may have permeated the Florida hotel and tourism industries in recent years. The Eurohouse investigation furthermore revealed that numerous companies acting as temp labor staffing agencies are operating throughout Florida and the nation. Many of these agencies are owned and operated by people from Eastern Europe or states of the former Soviet Union. There appears to be a high degree of interconnectivity between the companies, strong indicators of organized crime, and similar patterns of exploitation practiced by the suspect companies. Ongoing investigations of labor trafficking throughout Florida also demonstrate that U.S. citizens are increasingly involved in the exploitative practices. They operate what have been referred to as quasi-legitimate companies, relying once again on the labor of foreign nationals who arrive on J-1 or H-2B visas. These labor leasing companies are recruiting laborers from countries not traditionally associated with providing workers for Florida's hospitality industries. The gaps in Florida law. Because they are unlicensed, and these labor leasing companies in Florida are not subject to DBPR investigations or sanction. The Florida Labor Pool Act addresses day laborers but does not cover seasonal workers. And a similar gap exists in Florida migrant labor laws. These gaps are the invitation for exploitative labor practices, and they need to be readdressed immediately by legislative and regulatory responses. Hundreds of victims are estimated to be exploited annually in this manner throughout Florida. So thus far, we have examined the case. And it's not just from police officers or cops, but rather it's from the direct testimony of the women that are exploited. The women who had their paychecks stolen, the women who were charged exorbitant fees, the women who were not given paid overtime, even when they worked more than 40 hours. And Justin King, Beau, knew about it. And so when he says he was just an alien smuggler, he is lying to you. And this is why he's refused to discuss the case, because he knows that the facts are damning. Here I will draw your attention to the direct testimony of one of the women who was exploited. Her name is Tanya. I can hear some of you right now objecting. Beau was just a paper pusher. He was filling out the visas as he was instructed to do. He was filing paperwork. Who cares about U.S. immigration law? It's unjust. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I believe in open borders and a just immigration policy. But no matter what our immigration policy is, people like Beau and the activities that they engaged with should never be permitted. He exploited these young women. He stole their paychecks. And no, he wasn't just a paper pusher. He was directly involved in every aspect of the criminal conspiracy, of the exploitation of these workers, of this class treachery. I will draw your attention now to the testimony from Tanya, one of the many women that he exploited. Well over 200 women from Bulgaria and Romania were exploited in this fashion. I will show you her testimony and how King was directly involved in every aspect of the exploitation. Yes, I did, probably after a couple of months. And I had been promoted as an inspector of housekeeping, which is a supervisor of housekeeping, inspecting rooms. How much was your raise? How much money? I started getting $8 an hour. $8 an hour? Nods head. Your visa was scheduled to end in November of 2005. Did anybody at the Eurohouse offer to file some type of petition to get an extension on your visa? Yes, they did offer to file an extension. It's important here to look and see that she was supposed to be getting $8 an hour. But this next segment is incredibly important. It shows the fraudulent scheme to pile fees and charges on these women to create a condition of peonage, of debt slavery, where they were forced to work for basically nothing. Who offered to file the extension for you? I spoke with Mr. Justin King and I spoke with Stan from Eurohouse. So I've been told they are offering extensions. They are going to provide for me. And I wanted to be loyal to my employer. I was thinking that was the right thing to do. I have a visa from them, so I should extend. So you were going to work longer at the Embassy Suites then? Yes. How much were they going to charge you for the visa extension? They told me the extension was going to cost $1,154. Now, earlier we discussed the Southern Poverty Law Center report on the abuse of J1 visas and H2B visas, where the charge of fees, the costs, was completely unregulated. And King had no legal expertise, and he was committing fraud when he filed these applications. King had no legal experience. This charge of $1,154 was totally unregulated and totally unwarranted, the purpose of which was to divert this woman's wages into King's own pocket. Now, in order for this visa extension to occur, did anybody bring you a new written agreement for you to stay on with Eurohouse for a longer time? Yes, Justin King bring me the new agreement, which I need to sign. That's the seasonal employment agreement that Mr. King brought you? Yes. And where did you? You said he brought it to you. Where did he bring this agreement to? At the housekeeping office in Embassy Suites Hotel. So you were actually working the day he brought this to you? Yes. And it was Justin King that brought you Government's Exhibit 102? Yes, ma'am. Now, did Justin King, did he actually know through this offer and apply for it for a visa extension for you? Yes, ma'am, he did. Did he ever tell you that when he was applying for this visa extension that you weren't going to be able to work at the Embassy Suites where you were making $8 an hour and that you were going to have to go over and work at the blank golf resort? No. He never told you that you were going to have to change hotels? No. I'm going to show you what's already been introduced into evidence as Government Exhibit 104. Do you recognize this? Yes. That is my extension of my visa, which I did with Eurohouse. And this is the extension that Mr. King got for, I think you said you paid $1,154? Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Can you read the amount received on this document? Yes, ma'am. The petitioner, the listed petitioner here, ma'am, if you could read that and just tell me whether or not that says Rodenhouse, Eurohouse DBW blank resort. He never told you that you were going to change hotels? No. And one of the things that's important to notice is that not only was Mr. King totally involved with every aspect of this, he personally went to the hotels where these women were working at. He knew that they were being exploited. He knew how much they were being charged for these visa extensions. He knew how they were paying for it. How were they paying for it? Let Tanya's continuing testimony paint you the picture. The first paycheck we have here says, the date down at the bottom, the pay period's 12/10/2005 to 12/23/2005. Do you agree? Yes, that's correct. And then 78.7 hours at $8 an hour, and this looks to be your year-to-date total pay. Would you agree? Yes. And then this $629.60. There was an additional fees for $354. What were those additional fees that you were having to pay? Those are the withholding for my extension, which had been done not once, but 3 different checks. That was $1,154 for my extension, the visa. So they took it out over time? Yes. So after working 78.7 hours that month, you made a sum total of $210.60? That's correct. Just so we have a back of the envelope calculation. She made only $200.60 for 78.7 hours of work. How much is that per hour? Well, if we do a calculation quickly, that number is a mind-boggling $2.68 an hour. Justin King charged this woman more for her extension than she ended up taking home. And remember, they were also charging that woman $250 in rent per month to live in a condominium with 20 other people. Furthermore, it didn't just end there. They also committed overtime fraud. When in the United States of America, when you work more than 40 hours a week, you must be paid time and a half for every hour after those 40 hours. That means if you were making $8 an hour like Miss Tanya, for the 41st hour, you're supposed to be making $12 an hour. That is federal law. In order to get around that requirement, Justin King created a second company to write a second paycheck. The first paycheck was from Eurohouse, the company that he ran. The second was from another corporation that was invented for the purpose of paying her while she didn't know about our overtime rules. What about overtime, Miss Tanya? When you received paychecks from Eurohouse, were you provided overtime or time and a half? No. Were they break up your paychecks and put 40 hours on one? Yes. They were giving 2 separate checks. We were new in the country and I didn't know, and they told me that's the way it has to be. And I was thinking that was normal. And you didn't know any better? Yes. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to enter Exhibit 131A and B. Are these your paychecks? Yes, that's my paychecks. Do you recognize that? Did you turn these paychecks over to the federal agents? Yes, I did. The first paycheck we have here says, the date down at the bottom, the pay periods 12/10/2005 to 12/23/2005. And then at 78.7 hours at $8 an hour, this looks to be your year to end date total pay. Would you agree? Yes. And then let's skip on down. This particular one says that you worked 80 hours at $8 an hour for $640. Do you agree? Yes, that's correct. You had taken out $67 for federal withholding. Do you agree? Yes. And then let's go down to the bottom on this check stub, on this particular one. It says you work 6.5 hours at $8 an hour. Is that correct? $52? Yes. Was that the same pay period? That 12/24? Yes. That is the separate check that I had been given on the same time, the same day, that gave me 2 separate checks. And this particular, the one that had your overtime hours, was that one purportedly issued by a company in the name of AA Limited? Yes. And then your full-time hours, did that pay stub say Eurohouse? Yes. You said Mr. King brought you the extension of your agreement with Eurohouse to the Embassy Suites. Did Mr. King know that you actually worked at Embassy Suites full-time? Yes, he did. Who would give you your paychecks, Miss Tanya? Justin King, the secretary of Eurohouse. Do you see the individual that you know as Justin King in the courtroom today? Yes, he's here. Your Honor, if the record would reflect that she's identified the defendant. That is not the words of the government, not the words of the cop, but the words of one of the women who was exploited, who was charged thousands of dollars to be there, over $1,000 to get there, and another $1,100 when she was there. And then she was worked at $7.25 an hour and forced to pay off those fees and rent. $2.68 an hour. No wonder Mr. King was able to go around to resorts and underbid other workers, other companies who were paying their workers full-time wages. That is who Beau is. That is exploitation. That is despicable. Now that you've heard how Tanya was exploited, you must keep in mind that there were hundreds of others in similar situations. Brought to the US under false pretenses, paid sub-minimum wage, charged extreme rent in crowded housing conditions, and then paid so little when they worked so much. Overtime fraud, and additionally, unregulated fees that forced these women into sub $3 an hour paychecks. That is what they did. And it was very, very lucrative. After his conviction, Justin was forced to return over $1 million that was exploited from these women. Imagine that. $1 million. Now, let's see what Justin says about this behavior. How does he characterize what you have heard, which is outright exploitation of vulnerable young women for his personal profit? How does he describe it when he went on the Lions of Liberty right-wing podcast?
To know you a little bit better. So tell us a bit about yourself. I know you come from a background as a military contractor. So how did you get from there to where you are now, running this really amazing, if I do say so myself, news and commentary site?
Well, I was a military contractor for about 8 years. I did mostly non-governmental work. And at one point, we angered the federal government, and I got my door kicked in. And I kind of realized at that point that I might have better uses for my skills. And that brought me to journalism because I could shoot a gun and I could shoot a camera. So I started with Digital Journal, which is a small Canadian outlet. I moved to the Anti-Media and then the Fifth Column.
Wow. Let's just take a step back for a second. So can you tell us a little bit more about, I mean, I don't know how much you can detail, maybe legally, but what went on there with that whole incident there with getting your door kicked in? Was that because of something the company you were working for had done? Or, was that something that you were under investigation for? Can you detail that a little bit more?
Well, basically, I worked for a company that did refugee recovery. We got refugees out of bad countries, whether it be Eastern Europe, Central Asia, wherever. We started working in Uzbekistan, and this much is my personal theory. Uzbekistan was a U.S. ally at the time. They were also really, really, really evil to Jewish people. We were getting them out, and we were visited by State Department, and they told us to stop. And I don't know if you've ever met any military contractors, but when you say something like that to them, especially when they've already been paid, you're likely to get, middle finger, which is what happened.
So it's important to remind you that the J-1 visa, the cultural exchange visa, was issued and regulated by the State Department. On the contrary to what he's claiming there, the State Department was aware that Eurohouse was issuing fraudulent visas using forged letterhead of hotels in order to get these women into the country. And they stopped allowing him to apply for visas under the company named Eurohouse. They formed a second fraudulent company called Roland, where they continued to file these visas. And he wasn't doing it in Uzbekistan. He was doing it as part of an organized criminal conspiracy here in Florida, right in his hometown. So I would love to hear more about these Uzbeki Jewish refugees, because they are not mentioned at all in his criminal conviction. They are women from Eastern Europe, former Soviet bloc countries of Romania and Bulgaria, not Uzbeki Jews. This is, without a doubt, a lie. So what should we do with Beau? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that we have an unrepentant human trafficker who is a major figure on the left here on YouTube. He goes around and lies about the behaviors that he perpetuated. He does not explain what he did to these women. And as far as I'm concerned, we cannot have someone advanced on the left, promoted by Google, promoted by the algorithm, promoted by now this, who is somebody who has exploited people like this. Imagine the damage that will be done to the movement if people find out that one of the most prominent voices on the left was a human trafficker and who exploited hundreds of women for his own profit. We cannot complain about the labor conditions at Amazon. We cannot complain about the actions of people like Matt Gaetz if we allow this to go unanswered and underresponded to. As I've shown you multiple times in this video, Beau is not forthright and is not contrite. For redemption to occur, and I believe in rehabilitative justice, I believe in redemption. I believe forgiveness. But in order for forgiveness to take place, remorse, genuine remorse, and accountability must be shown. And that is not what has happened with Beau. Beau has gone and misled people about the details of this case. He has refused to discuss further his background and how much he personally profited. As I think I've demonstrated clearly in this video, no matter what you may think of the presenter, Beau is the person who has profited personally from the exploitation of literally hundreds of people, paying them sub-minimum wage, forcing them into crowded apartments with up to 20 people at a time. And he made, and his co-conspirators made. That is unacceptable. And we must reckon. If we are going to be advocates for immigration, for advocates for the downtrodden, advocates for people that are oppressed, we must hold our own accountable. Beau, you must respond.